First, I wanted to thank Harvey Offenhartz for helping me, well, first for recommending me to this wonderful space, and then for hanging the show with me. We had quite an afternoon. And to Sister Joanne, who I had some trepidation meeting. I did. Sister Joanne. Anyway, you're bubbly and enthusiastic and non-judgmental, and you came to my studio and you saw a number of things. I thought, oh, but it was okay. It was all good. So, thank you. So, when I first was invited here, I needed to think about what it was that I would show. Previously, I've shown work based, for example, on a song written by Leonard Cohen titled Take This Waltz. And Take This Waltz, it was one of those songs that got stuck in my brain. I just couldn't get rid of it. So the only way that I could get rid of it was by actually making collages. So I did 24 collages based on Take This Waltz. Another time, I had created a large series of works based on the imagery and themes that I found in Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter. And there, when I went to the dump, which is, my friends know, my favorite place, that's part of the field trip coming to our house. I found this very tattered, falling apart, old copy of Scarlet Letter. And I was looking at it, and I saw a few paragraphs, and I just knew it was so beautiful. I didn't remember that from high school, that it was so visually perfect, and plus the themes, so I needed to do a whole series there. I've also created a series of works based on more formal aspects, such as Square, where I did a whole series just based on the square. So as I thought about what the purpose, as was said here, about what this particular gallery was all about, that is a space where one can actually see the creative energy that lives within people, expressed in the art that they create. I thought that perhaps I should focus instead of external themes on within myself as a central point for the show. Therefore the title, Collage, A Cure for a Disordered Life. Now, to begin with, I think Sister Rosemary had, Sister Joanne wrote, The Cure. And I said, no, it can't be The Cure. It's not The Cure, it's A Cure. All right. So, before I go on to whether or not collage is indeed a cure, I will talk a little bit about the history of collage, and then about my personal history as well. So there's argument. Where's Lucy, commoner? She'll correct me, I'm sure. There's argument as to whether Picasso or Braque were the first creators. But most seem to acknowledge that 1912 and 1913 were the years of the birth of collage. That is, collage as a self-conscious effort, not in its somewhat more folksy usage of prior years. Now, people have been rearranging materials and gluing and pasting them forever, whether it's feathers or straw, corn, butterfly wings, even hair, as we know, have been used in the expression of artistic gesture. Even birds. The male bowerbird, my favorite, Diane, my favorite bird, who resides in New Guinea in Australia, creates elaborate bowers. They're really assemblages with bits and pieces of sticks, stones, feathers, in whatever shape or color the bowerbird finds. He then arranges them in patterns, sometimes even using perspective from small stones to large to draw the female in. And in modern times, using plastic in terms of colored bits of plastic. Problems arise because apparently, frequently, females all choose one bower over the other to be the most attractive. But that's another story. So, with the invention of paper, the arranging of images can be abundantly found, whether in 12th century Japan, in the rearrangement of calligraphy and landscapes on screens, or on elaborate lace valentines created during Victorian times, so on and so forth. During the 19th century, the mass production and technologies of the machine age, particularly the mechanical printing process and the invention of photography, have provided even more materials for collage. So the years following World War I gave birth to great anxiety as artists struggled to make sense of their times and the upheavals that were aroused by World War I. There was a breaking down of national, economic, and class distinctions. This sense of disjunction and fragmentation found its way into the works of art as well. Collage was also used as a revolt against 19th century realism and from what was felt to be the tyranny of academic formulas. So over the years, collage has expanded to include assemblage, photomontage, and more currently what is called mixed media, which includes film, digital, and so forth. Collage became a term used to signify more than an art technique, but a way of representing an approach, philosophy, or perception of the modern world. It became bound up with concepts of the avant-garde, cubism, constructivism, Dada, futurism, or surrealism. I can't. I did a collage once. What ism are you? Artists such as Marcel Duchamp, Max Ernst, and Kurt Schwitters often use the technique of collage to shock by displacing objects out of logical context and reintegrating them in illogical combinations with other displaced objects. But for the most part, composition demanded order even when depicting chaos. And while the beginnings of collage as a movement started in Europe, collage principles found root in America with its diverse and fragmented population. So that gets me to my history. I was born, as Sister Joanne said, at the tail end of World War II in Latvia, where war raged between Germany and Russia. We had a large farm, and the farm was being bombarded, mostly at that time by Stalin's troops. So my family found way to refugee barracks in Germany, where I lived for the first 7 years of my life. We were first located in the British zone, and then later in the American zone, where we waited our turn to come to America. The waiting for my turn finds its way as numbers very often in the collages. The concept of next, whether it's next waiting there, next waiting in line, next waiting in Zabars, it's always next. So, life in the refugee camps as I experienced it was just fine. I was a child. I went to the Latvian school, which is a slightly larger army barrack than the one which I lived in with other families. I never learned German. It was just Latvian. I was thrilled when I was given a single egg to eat, which is a rare commodity in camp. I played with my little friends and did not experience my life as being different from anyone else's. It was just the way things were. It was only in retrospect, when I arrived in America, that I experienced the contrast so greatly. In Germany, everything was gray. The food, the people, the barracks, the sky. And when I arrived in America, all of a sudden I was jolted by color. The sky was blue. The sun was shining. As we got off the freighter in which we crossed the Atlantic, which is not a very pleasant story some of you have heard, yuck. We were given a small brown paper bag, and in it were oranges and bananas. It was incredible. I had never tasted a banana. It was yellow and orange. It was just wonderful. It was magic. We were put on the Long Island Railroad with our possessions, which all fit in one brown leather suitcase and one large wooden trunk, which is gray, which was gray, which still is gray, which I still use to this day. Jacket's in the attic, in case you're wondering. Jacket's going to say, where is it? This trunk contained our treasures. Jack is my husband. The trunk contained our treasures. Textiles from the farm that my grandmother and mother had made, family photos, and deeds to the land I had owned in Latvia, with the hope of returning there one day. That is what they brought with them. Everything else was gone. In America, I lived in a two-family home where my parents, grandparents, and great-aunt were all stuffed into the second floor. My great-aunt Tantalata was big, and so I mean stuffed with. I loved finding a box of old ribbons left in our attic. I would sneak upstairs and play with the ribbons one by one, loving the color, the texture, the illicit feeling of playing with something that wasn't mine. Later, when we had a parakeet, I named Chippy, I would collect the green feathers and was desolate. When poor Chippy flew away, happily probably, I had my friends hold seances for his return. I did. I made them hold hands, and I didn't know what a seance was. And to this day, I seem to be looking for lost Chippy feathers that could find their way into my collages. My love for the cast-offs that had found their way into our refugee camp, bits of fabric, torn papers, remains with me today. I believe it is a way of connecting with the past, while in the process perhaps exorcising it as well. So little wonder that today, truth be told, I take far greater care of my found objects that come from the dump than my store, gallery, or auction-bought possessions. The orphaned and battered seem to have far greater need for my care. They have been discarded and need tenderness to nurse them back to aesthetic utility. So, is collage a cure for a disordered life? It is no surprise then that my first and parallel career was that as a psychologist. My father was a veterinarian, although when we came to America, he worked as a gardener until he was able to work for the agricultural department again as a veterinarian. But they wanted a doctor. Well, I didn't please them exactly, but I did. I became a doctor in my own way. And more specifically, I worked in the field of medical psychology, where for decades I worked with both physically and emotionally wounded people. While art was always in the background for me, it was when I was working as a psychologist at NYU's Rusk Institute of Rehabilitation that I started to feel that art was my work as well. I was painting watercolors, oils on paper, making monoprints and so forth, mostly of Turner-like landscapes. But once I started making collages, I felt the most control and comfort. Every patient's story at Rusk was a tragic one. While I found somewhat of a release talking to my colleagues, we would sometimes have a very dark sense of humor, which is one way we could face the day. When at home, I found that talking about my patients did not work as well. Jack did not want to hear it. But when I was working on a collage, I would find some sense of peace, especially as I put the bits and pieces of my previous finds together so that they could be whole again. Just as I attempted to cobble together my battered patients, collage has also become a means to cobble together my fragmented life. Well, and there too, my background was Lutheran. When we went to Rockville Center on Long Island, all my friends were Jewish. I wound up spending more time in the synagogue. We never did go to church. Where was she? We went more. There she is. We went more to the synagogue than otherwise, and of course I dated Jewish men. So, and my husband is Jewish. So, when we had a son, he was bar mitzvahed. So, we went to synagogue for a while, and so we have Latvian, Polish in the background. Then when my son married his wife, her background includes being half black, sibling, and Muslim. So we cover a lot of territory within our own little family, which I assume many families do, and many people do have disordered lives. So there's a quote by Anais Nin in which she says, "When I cannot bear outer pressures anymore, I begin to put order on my belongings. As if unable to organize and control my life, I seek to exert this on the world of objects." So it continues, my love affair with materials, textiles, cast-off paper, pieces of metal, junk to others, but to me art. I love how fabric shreds, how paper yellows, how metal tarnishes, how alive these materials are, how transforming of the spirit. I often feel great energy around me when fragments are juxtaposed. And when a collage is finished, a sense of peace. In this show, I touch on some personal themes of deportation, loss, but mostly on the ability to put life back together and have sunshine enter. So is collage a cure? Perhaps not a cure, but collage can be seen as a process towards reintegrating life. And the process itself can be very, very rewarding.